Many people around Columbus are completely unaware of what happens inside City Hall, but each day their lives are impacted by the decisions made here. From the roads we drive on, to the water we drink, to the sidewalks in our neighborhoods, to the parks we explore, to the public safety we enjoy, people are working day in and day out to make our lives better. Welcome to Council in 90, where we share stories about what's happening in your community through the work done here at City Hall. Today, we're sitting down with Council President Pro Tem Elizabeth Brown to discuss how Columbus supports workers in the community. Today, we're talking about wages and supporting working families in Columbus. And you've long been an advocate for working families and for paid family leave, pay equity. Kind of give us a background of how you came into being so passionate about these issues.
Absolutely. Well, I think wages are the absolute foundation for building a strong community. Good paying jobs help families afford stable housing, put food on their table, support their children. They are the absolute foundation. And all of those things that make families stronger also make our neighborhoods stronger. So I think if you really want to measure how a community is doing, you have to look, are people able to not just get a job, but get a job that pays them a living wage where they can support their families. So we've been talking about living wage jobs. That's kind of the term, but I have also started adding to that family supporting jobs, right?
Okay.
Living wage jobs are family supporting jobs. And I think that that's the right framework to have, because truly living is being able to thrive with your family.
Okay. So you mentioned different types of wages there. So there's like living wage, prevailing wage, minimum wage. What can you tell us about the difference between all those types of items?
Yes, those are all the little terminologies
Yeah.
we throw around in government, but they mean real things.
Yeah, and it's good for people at home to understand what those things are as we keep going in our conversation here.
So a minimum wage is a standard set by federal government or state government. It's just a baseline for what employers are allowed to pay. In the nation, it is, I think, about $7.25.
I think that sounds right.
Yeah.
Which is pretty low.
It's pretty low.
Yeah.
And in Ohio, almost 15 years ago now, I think 2006, we passed a constitutional amendment to have a higher minimum wage in the state of Ohio than the federal wage. Many states have done this. And so ours is, I think now like $8.50, right around there, and it goes up every so often based on consumer price index and like a whole calculation. And that's in our Constitution. But $8.50 is still not a living wage.
No.
So it's really important to make that distinction between minimum wage and living wage. Right now in the state of Ohio, it is illegal to pay an employee to do work, whether it's contract work or full-time salaried work. It's illegal to pay them less than the minimum wage. But you can work an $8.50 an hour job. You can work 40 hours a week. Do your due diligence at your job, perform great every day, put your time in, and still be at the federal poverty level.
Oh.
So the minimum wage isn't sufficient, and that's why we talk about a living wage. Living wage is what it takes in your paycheck to earn enough money to pay for housing, stable housing, to buy food, to support your family. And the living wage, the reason that is, there's no perfect calculation for what that is that everyone's living circumstances are different. We talk about living wages being just about $15 an hour.
Okay.
Basically, that's based on the average family. So if you're a single person who has no dependents, your living wage, truly what it takes to just support yourself and no one else, is less than 15. But if you're a head of a household and you've got a dependent child, it's going to take you $15 an hour to support that. If you're one working person and you've got two dependent children, it's going to take you more than $15 an hour.
Yeah.
So that's really why we have to set the baseline, I think, at 15, because for most families to thrive, most families to even get by, you got to make at least $15 an hour. And then prevailing
Yeah,
wage is
prevailing,
that,
yes.
prevailing wage is that third one. It's a little bit more obscure. Minimum wage and living wage, I think, are things that we talk about as public officials a lot because these are kind of baseline numbers across our communities.
Yeah, those items are definitely in national conversation, local conversation as well.
Yes, that's right. And prevailing wage, it's more obscure. It's not as much in the national conversation, but it's an important one. Prevailing wage just means the average wage of any given sector. We use that specifically to talk about construction jobs. So there are state laws around public projects, public construction projects, needing to pay a prevailing wage so that, if I'm building, a large, like the OSU hospital, for example, I don't want a contractor coming in and bidding to the lowest possible wage because you're probably not going to get someone who's appropriately trained for that work. So you want to set the standard at, what's the average, the median income or wage someone makes, because then you're probably going to get at least the standard for training and qualifications on that construction project. And that's important when you think about public dollars going to construction projects. We want to make sure we're paying qualified people so that these projects last.
Yeah, that's an important distinction because we want these facilities that we're paying millions of taxpayer funds to create and to build, and we want the workers to be qualified, and that's a very interesting concept to think of.
And I actually like to pull that thread a little more.
Yeah, of course.
So public tax dollars going to these, priority projects that we have as a public have said it's important to build this hospital, to build this jail, to build this facility, water treatment plant, whatever it is. So we want to have some rules kind of governing how those public resources are spent so we're getting a good return. We're familiar with talking about that when it comes to prevailing wage. I think we need to apply that same concept when it comes to a living wage. If public resources are at stake for a job, that job needs to pay a living wage. I mean, it makes no sense, which is where some of our policy advances in the last couple of years have come from, this idea that if public dollars are on the line, we really need to hold that job up to a higher standard than just the minimum wage, which doesn't support a family.
Yeah, that's a pretty solid policy, and it really helps build a community that is able to move forward in the future. And why is it important that a community has those living wages and is able to really support the people in itself, in the community? Why is that an important topic that we should be focused on obtaining?
Well, so just the brass tacks real quick. Our city budget is funded by income taxes.
Yeah.
So residents, our 900,000 residents across Columbus need a healthy city budget. They need our budget to be able to pay for first responders, code enforcement officers, public health workers, strong water sewer infrastructure, better roads and sidewalks. They need that. And the only way we get that is if we grow our income tax base. And so it is actually in the interest of literally everyone that the jobs in Columbus pay a reasonable living wage at the baseline. Now, beyond that, there are some more kind of like meta reasons for why.
Oh, we're here for the meta reasons.
We're here for the meta. Okay, so so beyond just the budget, you think about when a family is able to earn an income and make enough money to support themselves. They're less stressed. They have a more certain future. They're really able to help build up their own neighborhood, give back to the community, and lead healthy lives and raise children who will lead healthy lives too. So it's a virtuous cycle to pay better wages. When we leverage public resources to prioritize the needs of workers, that really benefits the whole community.
And so council has, over the last few years, put in some city programs that require companies to set a minimum wage of $15 an hour to participate in those programs. And so that's an effort by city council to move corporations, not the public sector, in that direction, right?
Yep.
Yeah, cool.
Yep. Absolutely, and for that very reason, that if public dollars are on the line, the bar should be high.
Yeah.
Because I think it's important to note that we talk a lot about job creation, but not all jobs are created equal.
No.
And that's why we require those wages. When a job doesn't pay a living wage, employees struggle to work to support their families. The opportunity gap widens, and many families have to rely on public assistance to bridge that gap. So again, this is a role the city can play to help incentivize wages to be pushed higher.
Okay, cool. So I want to transition a little bit into your work on paid family leave, because that's part of it. It's part of providing a good backbone for workers in Columbus. Tell me a little bit about your background on this issue and why it's so important to you.
Yeah. Well, so to make that bridge very clear from wage to benefits, let's build this bridge together. So,
perfect.
So I go to work. I make a wage that helps me manage my budget at home. Right? It's just enough to pay my childcare bills, pay my rent or mortgage, buy the food my family needs, and hopefully get my kids some back to school outfits too, right? Yeah. So that's a good job I have. I'm able to make those ends meet. But if I don't have benefits, that wage actually doesn't help me in
doesn't take you very far.
Life. Yeah, it doesn't take me very far, exactly. So healthcare benefits, we're all familiar with the cost of healthcare in this country increasing, and it's very important that workers have health insurance. So that's critical. And I think we're all familiar with talking about health insurance as the classic workplace benefit. Yeah. But there are a host of needs that people have, and family is foundational among those. So I became passionate about the paid family leave conversation, honestly, when I got pregnant with my first child. And I wish that I'd had the foresight to think about it before, but when I was applying for that job, I did not ask what their paid family leave policies were. I think I took for granted that it would just be there. And what I found out when I was pregnant is that my workplace didn't offer a full, comprehensive paid family leave benefit. And that's the reality for a lot of families, that workplaces in this country really haven't kept pace with what families need. I don't know if they really were ever at pace with what families need, but we certainly haven't kept pace. Paid family leave is something that people need when they have a baby, moms and dads, right? Whether it's two moms or two dads, whether you adopted a child or gave birth. Yeah. You need that time to care for your baby. But you also need paid family leave. Many families face health issues with either their children or their parents or a sibling. And only 17% of workers today in the United States have access to paid family leave. 17%.
That seems pretty shockingly low. And you like, there's so much conversation about it, like moving towards that direction, that I don't know if I've ever actually heard that statistic, because that's.
And you know what's worse?
Oh gosh.
Yeah, it's worse. Well, two things are worse. So 17% in the U.S. of workers have access to paid family leave from their employer. When you look at low wage workers, which is typically like under $12 an hour is what we consider low wage, only 4% have access. And these are the workers that really need it the most. Yeah. And only 4% have access. We are one of two countries in the world that don't have some kind of job-protected, guaranteed paid family leave.
Only one of two in the world?
Yeah, do you know what the other one is?
I don't want to guess, but...
Papua New Guinea.
Oh, that's fun.
And apparently, I don't know where I heard this, apparently they're working on theirs.
Oh. So we'll be the only one in the world, probably.
And we absolutely need a standard paid family leave across the country. I mean, we have a high infant mortality rate in this country. We have the United States is, I believe, the most or one of the most dangerous places in the developed world to give birth. Our maternal mortality rate.
It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make any sense.
No.
And it's because we think about treating health care, sort of through the health system, and we forget about these social determinants of health, right? About creating healthy families, creating healthy children. Healthy children grow up to have healthy babies.
Yeah.
And I mean, the science has proved that at this point. So it's not just about what kind of care a person gets once they walk into a doctor's office or a hospital door. It's really about, are we giving kids a chance to be healthy, because they will grow up to have healthy families too. And I believe paid family leave is part and parcel of that. When the American Academy of Pediatrics is very clear on their recommendations for newborns. I mean, they recommend breastfeeding up to 6 months. I know, because I've pumped. That's hard to do.
Yeah.
And I have a job where I can set aside, I'm no longer pumping. My youngest is almost a year and a half. But when I was pumping, I had a job where I could set aside the time. I could take my 20-minute break twice a day to do it. Not everybody is in that circumstance. And even though the federal law now requires that companies give you that time, it's very hard in the reality of many workplaces to make that work when you're, 4 weeks postpartum. It's just hard. And sorry, I keep throwing these awful
I feel
statistics.
so downtrodden right now.
I know, these awful statistics at you. So another one is that 1 in 4 women go back to work 2 weeks after giving birth.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So how are we going to establish, healthy breastfeeding patterns? I mean, how are we going to do any of this for our youngest residents if we don't have these kind of foundational policies? Dads taking paternity leave is also really good for kids. There have been studies that have shown kids have increased educational attainment later in life if their fathers took paternity leave. These studies were done in other countries because we don't have paternity leave in this country.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's very important. And the good news is, okay, so that's all the bad news.
All right, give me some good news. I want to feel better, okay?
Yeah. Okay, so the good news is we did pass a paid family leave policy for City of Columbus workers. And we have close to 9,000 people that work for the City of Columbus. So that's close to 9,000 families. And we're the 10th largest employer in the region. So not only is it important for the city to help set a standard for other employers, but it's also, we just affect a lot of people's lives. It's just going to be better for our community if we have these policies.
I don't imagine with the city taking that effort, it makes it a more competitive workplace, and people will want to, and it'll encourage other businesses to do the same, which is exciting.
Exactly. We want to attract and retain.
All right, cool. You're building me back up.
Okay, good. Well, then here's one other piece of good news. The policy we passed in the City of Columbus for our workers, it was the first of its kind in the Midwest and the third nationally to be a comprehensive paid family leave program. So that means we're not only allowing workers to take time caring for a newborn, right? But also caring for their immediate family in a time of need. 1.1 million people in Ohio today are caring for a sick or aging loved one. 1.1 million.
Wow.
Volunteer basis, caring for a sick or aging loved one. And 10,000 people turn 65 every day in this country. So we need to start thinking about how workplaces allow people to care for their family and not have to choose between the family they love and the paycheck they need.
Yeah. So how do we start getting at the stigma, I guess, around paid family leave in the U.S.? Because everywhere else around the world has these comprehensive programs and has programs that are better than ours. And, we consider the United States to be, a lot of us consider it to be the best of the best, but we're not. And how do we start having those conversations to move us in the right direction?
Man, well, if you knew that, I'd be starting your presidential super PAC right now.
Oh, that's exciting.
I think that it starts with all of us sort of telling our stories loudly and proudly. That really claiming what we need to be successful in the workplace. It's about wages and it's about benefits, right? We need both to build a healthy economy. Instead of thinking about the individual worker, we need to be thinking about the families, which is why a lot of times when I say, we employ close to 9,000 people, I really think of, we employ close to 9,000 families.
Okay.
There are other people who depend on the folks that come to work every day for the City of Columbus. And I think if employers started recognizing their employees as as family members, right? That would do a lot to change the conversation. But we've got a long way to go, and in the midst of it, our economy is changing. So I don't know the stats on this perfectly, but we are moving towards a more gig-based economy.
Yeah.
And that relationship between a contract employee and their employer is very different from a salaried employee and their employer. It's up to us as policymakers to be pretty vigilant about that relationship between employee and employer, regardless of whether they're contracted or salaried, because it's in the employer's interest to move an employee to that contract basis, even if they still have, control over them as an employee. And when they're in that contract basis, they don't have to do the healthcare benefits. They don't have to put them on their paid family leave policies. I mean, there's a lot of benefits that could erode if we don't stay vigilant to this need in our economy.
It's encouraging to hear you talk about the gig-based economy, because there's a lot of graphic designers out there and a lot of people who you don't think about in a traditional sense. And so, I hope that you talk to your friends in other parts of the government here in Ohio and in the country about moving us in that direction of supporting those workers.
Yes, I mean, I really hope that we pass a statewide, state-based paid family leave program so all residents can access it. I think what's more likely is that a federal one would pass before a state one. And that's really due to political gerrymandering and kind of the composition of the legislature. Not that the composition of Congress is a ton better, but
yeah, well, we've seen some maps in Ohio that
yes, and also the good news about the plans that have kind of gained traction on the state and federal, because other states have passed their own state-based policies. New York, New Jersey, California, Oregon. Connecticut, Delaware, I think, maybe Delaware.
Okay.
So there are a few states who've passed it. Those plans that are gaining traction on paid family leave are comprehensive, so they recognize that full spectrum of what an employee needs, not just caring for newborns, but caring for immediate family members who are sick, so that you're not choosing between a family you love and a paycheck you need. They've recognized that, and they've also recognized this kind of gig-based economy. Yeah, so that you can pay into a paid family leave program regardless of who's employing you. Basically, the benefit follows the worker.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's important because workers change jobs on average, twice as much as they did 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely.
A quick thing one more thing on paid family leave and how it affects women.
Bring it on.
Okay, all right. So if you want to measure whether a community is successful, I really think you have to start by measuring the success of its women. Women are more and more often primary breadwinners in families. They are almost always key breadwinners, right? I mean, just in a majority of households now, women's paychecks play a crucial role. So it's their sort of economic impact. But it's also just the care that women provide for their families. It is not reflected in our GDP.
No,
the GDP is a very male statistic, right? It measures just like work output. It doesn't measure all of this other caregiving that typically falls to women. But it should be, because that has economic impact. MetLife did a study and found that women over their lifetimes lose an average of $350,000 in income earnings.
Oh my gosh.
Because of their caregiving responsibilities, not just for children, but for their parents. When a parent gets sick, often it falls to the daughter. There's a really great article, I think in the Atlantic, maybe it was the New Republic, called America's Working Daughters. We talk a lot about working mothers and their strain, but this put a really interesting reverse spin on what I think will be what a lot of folks now think is going to be a growing problem, which is America's working daughters. And that's why a comprehensive paid family leave policy is so important, because you've got to account for this. The workforce is not monolithic. We're not just robots in a machine.
Yeah.
We're families.
All right. Well, so what's the next item on the agenda for you to move to support kind of working families in Columbus?
Well, we just passed a renewal of our paid family leave policy here in the city of Columbus, which I'm really proud of. We just did that before break.
Awesome.
Yeah, and that basically makes the caregiver portion of our paid family leave program permanent. So again, that's almost 9,000 families that are going to get the benefit of this policy. And part of what I think we do at the city of Columbus also is to help be, thought leaders and standard setters. So after we passed our program, we saw the county, Franklin County commissioners pass a program for their workers. We saw the Franklin County auditor pass a similar program for the workers in that office.
Okay.
And I'm really proud that we're setting the standard for where employers should go. You still shouldn't have to win the boss lottery to get paid family
To win
leave.
the boss lottery.
Yeah. So we need to have actual federal standards so that it's not about winning the boss lottery. So that's something I'm really proud that we just got done.
Okay.
And then looking forward, we passed our $15 an hour policy to ensure that no city programs incentivize jobs that pay less than 15, right?
Mm-hmm.
We importantly also passed with that a sort of 3-year review requirement. So every 3 years, and we're coming up on year 3, I guess next year will be year 3. So I'm going to be paying a lot of attention to how that program is going.
Okay, good.
The living wage is not a stagnant number. It does change. And we need to make sure we are, with a fine-tooth comb, understanding how $15 an hour is working in our economy right now at that review time. Because if we need to raise the number, we will. So that's a really important piece coming up on wages. There are also some council members, some of my colleagues and I are working on a wage theft ordinance.
Okay, cool.
So a lot of employers, because they can sort of take advantage of contract status for employees a little easier, like we were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
They might misclassify workers. That's against the law. There are rules around contract employers. They have to be able to control their own hours. There's a control thing. If the employer has a certain amount of control, it shouldn't be classified as contracting. So we want to ensure that employers are not misclassifying employees.
Okay.
We want to be sure that employers are not paying employees less than they should be. Any kind of violation of wage standards is considered wage theft. It's not often detected, and employers don't often get punished. And so, we really think there's a route the city can take. Oftentimes we have to be creative in making city policy because things like wages are set by the state. They're not set by the city. So we have to be creative in enforcing someone else's rules.
Okay.
Yeah, the way that the governmental system in the U.S. is made is that you enforce your own rules. The federal government has federal rules, they enforce them. A felony, if it's federal felony, state felony, those entities, prosecute those crimes.
Okay.
We enforce our rules, right? Well, in a couple of instances these days, we've really had to look at how are we going to enforce someone else's rules, and you have to be creative to do that. So I'm looking forward to some creativity to ensure that we're cracking down on wage theft.
I'm very thankful that you're on the case.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. So I had one last question for you.
Sure.
I just wanted to ask you about your title. This is kind of a little quirky question.
Yeah.
You're the Council President Pro Tempore. What does that mean, and how did you get it?
Yes. Well, you are asking me to recall my Latin from high school.
Oh, yes,
So
I
I'm
am.
going to give you the official definition here.
Okay.
Right, pro tempore would be for a time, right? So
Okay.
I'm president for a time, Elizabeth Brown.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And it's funny because President pro tem is a term that's used in a lot of legislative bodies.
Mm-hmm.
I think in the U.S. Senate, it's reserved for the oldest dude. Or the oldest person, but it's
The oldest,
dude,
yeah.
right?
Well, typically, yes. Yeah.
Like if you're the oldest, then you get called the president pro tem. Who knew, right?
Yeah, who knew?
But it has an actual function on city council, and that for a time is pretty self-explanatory.
Mm-hmm.
if the council president can't be there for a meeting, I function as the council president. So I would call the meeting to order and do the legislation and, call the roll and do all those things. That's really the core function.
Okay.
And because that's the core function of the council president, I'm basically there to fill in on any of his core functions if he is not able to. And how I got it is essentially by asking my colleagues for their support to get that position. So the council president and the council president pro tem are all voted in by the council members. So all 7 council members have a vote on president and president pro tem. And then the committees and the committee chairs are not done by vote. That's all determined by the council president.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Another little nugget I wanted to add into today's episode about.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And it made me recall my Latin there.
Well, that's exciting.
It is.
You don't
I
get to
love
use it every
Latin.
day.
I mean, everyone says that Latin is a dead language, but actually we do speak it every day.
Yeah, a lot of our English language is built upon that.
The word language comes from Latin.
Oh my gosh, mind blown. We can do a whole other episode about Latin influences in our.
We could, and do you know what language through which Latin principally influenced English?
Oh gosh, I would guess German.
No, so
No?
German has nothing to do with Latin.
I'm totally wrong. I just know a lot of English is based off of German.
Well, so we're considered, I'm sorry, can I nerd out?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
I would prefer that.
Okay, so English is considered a Germanic language,
Yes.
meaning we get our roots from German, but we have a heavy influence from Latin via the Romance languages. So there's Germanic languages, Romance languages, a whole other set of languages.
The French series of languages.
Yes.
Okay.
So Latin was, the Roman Empire sort of baseline for a lot of those. So Portuguese, Italian, Spanish, French, and Romanian all came from Latin. There's a set of Germanic languages. I don't know those as well. But those were basically countries touched by the Roman Empire, and then they all spoke their own languages. The influence on the English language of Latin comes through French.
Okay.
Because of in the year 1066, whoever
We are
it was,
digging deep.
whoever-
We are digging
yeah.
deep on Council of 90 right now.
Yes, we are. Whoever conquered England in that year was a French conqueror, and my Latin teacher would be very disappointed to me that I'm forgetting the name. But Charlemagne? It was Charlemagne. I think.
That sounds right.
Charlemagne.
So Charlemagne was a French king and eventual Roman emperor who reigned from 800 to 814. William the Conqueror, on the other hand, was a French duke who invaded England in 1066 and became king. The more you know.
So there was Old English, which had no Romance language influence, no Latin influence. But then by Middle English, you saw the Latin influence emerge. And we are both Germanic and Romance.
Okay.
Most of the cool words are influenced by Latin.
Okay.
Most of the standard everyday English is
boring
influenced by German. Yeah.
Okay. Well, you get all the hot content here on Council in 90, let me tell you.
We just lost all the listeners.
Now, I'm sure they stuck around. This may have been their favorite part of the episode.
Well, this is, I really am like a total English nerd. I was an English major in college, and I love this kind of stuff. So.
Well, cool. Maybe we'll have to have a separate episode about this going forward. Thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate this conversation and look forward to catching up with you again on another topic in the future.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Council Pro Tem, thank you.